Okay, magandang umaga pong muli sa lahat. And I'm glad to be back here in our church. I missed you the last 2 weeks and thankful to be back here. And we are to discuss a rather controversial subject, but one that we cannot avoid because this is so pervasively talked about and marami ang nagbibigay ng mga kanilang opinion, mga kuro-kuro, at ang iba ay talagang ginagawa ito na pamantayan para sa lipunan at hindi maaari na ang Kristiyano ay walang alam na isagot sa ganitong usapin. And we are discussing for this month male and female. We will try to discuss the binary creation of God today. I'll break again on Sunday because I hope you understand it's the pastor's conference this week. Will be a very tiring week for me. So I'll take the Sunday off next Sunday. But the last 2 Sundays of February, we will look one by one at the masculine and then the feminine genders. So that is how we are doing it. Now you may be wondering about this symbolism. For those who still do not know, the symbol for female in the orange on your left side would be the mirror of Venus, while on the right side, your left side, is the spear and shield of Mars. So yan yung origin ng ganyang symbols. So it seems to say that the feminine is to look on the mirror, which I reject, but some observe. And while in the case of male is that of aggression like Mars. But we will look into that as we consider today this issue. And why are we considering it? For a very simple I know I'm back. For the simple observation that there has been an explosion of LGBTQ+, and the plus now is being required dahil marami pa after the LGBTQ. Ayaw na nila siguro magdagdag ng iba pa. Actually, ang kasunod na niyan ay LGBTQIA, pero meron pa rin. Kaya let's just say LGBTQ+, power and claims in the 21st century, they have exploded. And remember, this 21st century is just going into 24 years. We're 2024, so we are just 24 years in the 21st century. But the ascent of the prominence of this issue outmatches the previous centuries combined. And why is that? There can be many explanations, but in the United States, we can see how this, not only in the United States, but around the world, there is now acceptance of the gay community, and they have even a whole month that is given to them for remembrance. The Gay Pride often happens in June. So when June comes, expect all this gay pride to happen. This one is in Sao Paulo, in Brazil. But there are reasons why this has really exploded in these few years of the 21st century. 2 landmark legal decisions of the U.S. Supreme Court. One is known as the Obergefell versus Hodges, which was decided by a liberal Supreme Court in 2015, and its decision mainly was that it established same-sex marriage into American law. So in other words, because it is federal law, states have no power to reverse the Supreme Court decision. As in America, so with us, a Supreme Court decision becomes part of the law of the land. That's just the principle in most democratic countries. So when they decided that, although the vote was 5-4, meaning 4 did not want it to become a law, 5 who were liberal justices wanted it to be in the law, so that dominated everything else. In one vote, decided that America will be establishing the same-sex relationship as a real marriage. And if you are watching the internet, it has become even an explosive issue among Reformed Christians because of someone who is very respected, who took a position that is rather compromising, but more of that later. So that's one landmark decision. The other is Bostock versus Clayton County in 2020, and this decision established the LGBTQ plus as having civil rights as equal. Now remember, they already have equal civil rights as citizens. Without having to identify themselves as LGBTQ, they have equal rights, but now they are particularly identified as a community that should be given equal rights. I have no problem giving them equal rights as fellow human beings. But now they are all the more established in their claim that you can be an LGBTQ in your identity and require civil rights from the government. So because of these two, there had been a marked prominence of the LGBTQ issues. And let us look at what happened because of these decisions and because of other factors. There are now new challenges to Christians on sexual identity. One is there are multiplying claimants. More are claiming LGBTQ community. What they say, they are explaining, some pro-LGBTQ are explaining this as having been legitimized. Now they are coming out of the closets. So there are really more than we thought there were. That's what they're saying. But I think it also proves that there are many who would like to take advantage of some of the false rights given to this community, particularly that letter T, which we will discuss in the subsequent lessons, but not now. T stands for transgender, which means you can just identify yourself by sheer decision, and the government and everyone else should accept that decision. And there have been many who identified after they were arrested, they identified as female, and they were put in female prison. And they did their dastardly crime that they did outside prison, sexual abuse. What do you expect of real men, just because they identified as women, are allowed into female prisons, and they abuse the women there? It has happened, it has been documented, and that's the insanity of this claim. But this is going on. Mas marami na ang nag-aangkin na sila ay LGBTQ. Then legislation demands more laws are now being passed for LGBTQ benefits. And again, I'm saying they already have those benefits as just being citizens. Why would you need to identify them in a manner that as a Christian, I cannot accept as legitimate, but as citizens, I acknowledge their equal rights, that they should be given rights for citizens, and they already have it without having to add on identities that are illegitimate. So legislation in order to carry or court the LGBTQ votes, many Democrats are in the United States. There are a few here in our Philippine legislature, but I don't think it is ready to pass yet because of the opposition of the Roman Catholic Church. But in America, there is no such opposition. Your political career might in fact suffer if you oppose the LGBTQ legislation proposals. And add to that, there are now medical options. Medical options for physical changes through medical means, changing you before you attain puberty. This is one of the reasons they want it done on children, because after puberty, it is inevitable that the manliness of a man and the womanliness of a woman they are going to emerge. There is no avoiding it. So they try to avoid it by doing it on children, and in some states in America, they are allowed to do it without parental consent. Parang kalaban ang magulang, kontrabida ang magulang doon sa ikabubuti ng anak. Mas alam ng mga experts. That's how it is happening in the West today. And so these are the challenges we face. So what is really a Christian conviction when it comes to the male-female issue? What is the biblical position? Is based on the scriptures. The scriptures are clear right at the very beginning of the creation account. And I believe in the creation account of Genesis without any equivocation. And the Genesis account tells us in Genesis 1:27, so God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. So God created two sexual identities, or what we would call male and female as binary. You hear the binary many times sa computer, binary system, a combination of 1 and 0 in many ways. But here we are using binary as it pertains to sexual identity. There are only two from the time of creation, male and female. And let me just state here, though this is not my thrust in this lecture, my point that I want to establish at the beginning is that I believe male and female to be equal. There is equality of status, equality of value, equality of standing before God between male and female. We do not believe, though some Christians have held to the notion that men are superior to women, that is not the Christian position biblically. Biblically, men and women are equal. Equality, however, does not mean interchangeability. That is the fallacy. Yung sabihin nila na kailangan pareho ng bayad ang babae sa lalaki. Kung parehong ang ginagawa nila, eksaktong pareho, dapat talagang equal ang bayad. But the fact is, that is not the case. How many women are employed in construction? There are male-dominated works precisely because of the capacity of men. More of that later. But that is the point. Equality, I believe that. Interchangeability, no. Because there is a distinction established by God between male and female. And that is the biblical position. So one is either male or female by creation, and now we call it by reproduction, or also called procreation. That is, God is creating now no longer directly as He did in the original creation account. He is creating still. You are still God's creatures, but He now does so by way of means. And the means is through reproduction of male and female, and then generation, and you come out into the earth. And that's what you are, either male or female. So there are only two by creation. Biological production assigns the inflexible sexual identity. Hindi ito plastic that can be molded one way or the other. It is inflexible. You are male or female. What about the facts that science will attest to this, starting from a gamete. A gamete is either, it begins as a sperm or an egg. A sperm for the male and egg for the female. So it starts with that. You cannot produce a human being with just sperm or with just egg. You must fertilize the two and then produce what will be a human being. But the gamete is either sperm for male or egg for female. Now that gamete, when they fertilize from male and female, will produce the combination of chromosomes. For women, that's an XX combination. For male, it's an XY combination. From the chromosome combination, it's going to be revealed in the physical genitalia. And that's that. We do not begin with the genitalia difference, but rather from the very start of the reproduction process where gametes are fertilized between male and female. So I'm just showing you that science attests to the fact of male-female binary sexuality. Now, this is the case with 99% of births. Now, as we shall see, there are cases of deviancy. And the reason why there is deviancy is because we live in a fallen world. And in a fallen world, there can be deviation from what is normal, but that deviation does not dismiss the rule. For 99%, in fact, for more than 99%, this is the case. And we will consider that argument of abnormal birth. So this is the biblical position attested by science. There are only two sexual identity established by our reproduction and therefore biological. What we are biologically is what we are in our sexuality. So male and female as binary, it therefore defines what a sinful relationship is. Sexual intimacy other than binary is a sinful relationship. In other words, it is not what God has designed. It is not God's will. And if it is not God's will, then it is a violation of God's will if we insist on intimacy that is of a sexual nature between people who are of the same sexual identity. In other words, if they are not binary, then that relationship is sinful. Now, hindi natin sinisingle out yung non-binary relationship. There are other sexual sins. But Leviticus 18:22 says, "You shall not lie with a male as with a woman. It is an abomination." Just to give you an idea, the Hebrew of abomination, to'eba, means it is used for the place where all the waste of the camp of the Israelites in the wilderness, they assigned a place where all wastes go, and they called it to'eba. Now that is the word used for the relationship other than male and female. Now, as I've said, I'm not singling out homosexuality as a sin. There are other sexual sins that may be binary, meaning it's male and female, but it can be fornication, where there is no marriage and yet they seek sexual intimacy. That will be fornication, or unequal yoking in the case of believers. If they are intimate with someone who is not of like-minded faith, then that will be unequal yoking, which also the Bible forbids for believers because it will compromise their faith. Because marriage is a holistic relationship. You don't just unite your bodies. Marriage is uniting two persons as whole beings. And they become one flesh. And one flesh there is not just referring to the body, but to the whole human. So I'm not singling out this issue of non-binary relationship, but I'm prepared to say this. The gravity of sin, of same-sex relation, is notably heavy. It is noted in the scriptures because it is in that connection we have statements like in Romans 1:26 and following, "For this reason God gave them up. God gave them up to dishonorable passions, for their women exchanged natural relations for those that are contrary to nature, and the men likewise gave up natural relations with women and were consumed with passion for one another, men committing shameless acts with men and receiving in themselves the due penalty for their error." What is it that makes this sin of a heavier gravity than compared to other sexual sins, which also are heavy in gravity, but this is heavier? Why? Because in the case of other sins, You have to know the will of God. In the case of this sin, even nature tells you that it is wrong. That's the argument of Paul against nature. You don't even have to have special revelation from Scripture to know that it is wrong. The nature of your sexuality tells you that it is wrong. And yet, people who indulge in this relationship anyway go on in a relationship that Paul says God will give them up if they do not repent of their sins. So there is a notable heaviness that is imposed on non-binary intimacy. So, but at the same time, let me make it clear, we believe in the saving transformation that can happen to non-binary individuals, those who identify other than male and female according to their biological reproduction. God's grace can transform even any sexual sinners. And that is clear in 1 Corinthians 6. In 1 Corinthians 6, before verse 11, it catalogs the litany of sinfulness in which the Corinthians indulged before they were saved. And among them that the list includes is in verse 9, nor men who practice homosexuality. So, in fact, two words are used here. The one who is active, the one who is passive, and both are guilty. Yet, verse 11 says, such were some of you. So the Corinthian members of the church were practicing that lifestyle, including homosexuality, but you, Paul says, were washed. You were justified in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ and by the Spirit of our God. So we believe, and for the church, this is our conviction, we do not reject non-binary individuals, whatever their identity may be. We know of their lifestyle, we know that that is sin, but we do not say that the gospel is not for you. We believe that the gospel can transform the worst of sinners. So the sinfulness of non-binary sex is clustered with other sinners transformed. So it's one of those sinners that the gospel can transform. The gospel can transform drunkards to sober people. The gospel can transform what is called here in other terms like adulterers and idolaters, thieves, revilers, and they can be transformed. So with the homosexual identity. Do not be deceived by those who will use science and say it just cannot be changed. Study after study have shown that that is a changeable status, changed by the power of God and of course with the discipline of the mind. And I can tell you of people, both those I met and authors I use, who were once into this indulgent lifestyle and they were changed by the grace of God. And we need to still believe that that grace can transform these people. So transformation, however, means they change from the sinful lifestyle to a holy life. Not perfect, but a holy life in which you take that lifestyle you lived in as sinful. And you are now trying to straighten your life the way God's will defines it. So let us consider here the anti-binary arguments, those who argue that there are other sexual identities than just male and female. And one argument is that we must differentiate sex and gender. And we can concede that it is true that sex is biological, gender is personal, and social identity, it's something that is looked upon by culture or society as being masculine or feminine. Now, as in any culture, there may be something wrong and sinful, there may be something right and common grace. So, in other words, gender, as defined by society, is not perfect. What is inflexible is the sexual identity. Even though gender is culturally and socially defined. But my point is that we see this now becoming the terminology of many. We used to welcome a child and the doctor will announce, it's a boy, it's a girl. In some states in the US, you can't do that. It's already forbidden by law. So we will later know. You have a child, what, boy or girl, let him decide. And then they also are cautious about pronouns because you need to be careful that the person may choose another pronoun for himself or herself, or they may even use they for a singular person. The terminology has changed, and it is a powerful component of advancing the LGBTQ plus cause if you can control the language. That's why even in the matter of pronoun, there are some Christians who take the position, just yield when it comes to pronouns, because after all, you want to reach them with the gospel. So if in that little thing, you are going to be unflinching, then you cannot reach them. But to yield even language is in fact to give them the power to define themselves. And I'm not about to give them that power as far as I'm concerned. Someone tells me that I should call him a her, I refuse, because by the law of language, the him is the him and not the her. So the changed terminology is one of the powers that LGBTQ plus are using in order to carry on their cause, and we should reject that. This is the fact of science. Biological identity from the womb form the male-female identity. Meaning even in the way of his growth, physically as well as socially and behaviorally, it is already being molded in the womb. And one fact of science is testosterone. Testosterone in male is very much larger in exposure than in female. Normally, it is from 10 to 20 times. And it is testosterone that will determine muscular build, even behavior of aggression. That's testosterone. Testosterone that sometimes is called the aggressive hormone because it prepares the man to take the masculine role, which we will see will include leading a community, including a household. And on the case of the woman, they're not without testosterone, but it is 10 to 20 times smaller. Now, there must be a reason for that in God's design. Because I do not believe in evolution. I do not believe in evolving of species. I believe that in the origin of mankind and all species, that is designed by God. That is my conviction that will be unflinching. But this is one scientific fact that shows that there is the difference between male and female, which is not just a matter of social convention, but already defined in the womb. For millennia, meaning thousands of years, except our 20th and 21st centuries, for millennia, sex and gender are considered aligned. So they are different, but what your sex is at birth, your social and physical behavior and cultural norm will align itself with how you are born. And for millennia, that is that way. Gender is not a choice. It is a duty, meaning what you are in life, how you are born, is how you should live. You are born male, be masculine. And we will look at the next lesson, what it is to be masculine, at least in its minimum. There, of course, are definitions of masculine which are merely social conventions that have no biblical ground. However, there is a way of being masculine different from being feminine. But this is the fact that gender, though different from biological sex, gender is aligned with your biological sex, and it is your duty to be in your life what you are by birth. So we reject the argument that gender is different from sex, therefore there can be a different gender than biological sex. There's another argument. What about abnormal sex births? And there are, as I've said, because of the anomaly of a fallen world, because sin has introduced anomalies, like in creation, a creation that was pronounced by God as good, but after the fall of man, that creation began to produce calamities that happen in nature. So in human reproduction, there is the reality of abnormal birth. Again, we concede that there are abnormal births, those who are called intersex, what used to be called hermaphrodism, and that is now considered an unacceptable term. So intersex or transgender, and this is not transgender yet of the LGBTQ. This is just the transgender in your kind of body. When you are born, there is an abnormality. But even scientists tell us abnormality, rather the argument that we counter that with is to say abnormality cannot be the ground of what has become predominant norm. Kung abnormality yun, that means there's a norm. And the norm is not what others tell us should be. The norm is how God created and designed things to be. And that holds true of human beings. And here is a science fact. Even most abnormal births can establish the biological sex. It may not immediately be clear in the body and the genitalia, but it will be made clear through chromosome study. And as I've said, it all began with the gamete, and that's it. And I'm using here a reference that is authored by Dr. Deborah So, and there are others that I use. But I particularly use this because Deborah So is not a Christian. In other words, she is not doing this out of an agenda to defend a faith, but rather she was led to this conclusion just because of science. Science after science, study and experiment have proven her case. In fact, her frustration, according to her, is that if they find a scientific discovery that proves male and female difference, the media will not take it, because the media is sold out to the LGBTQ. So even though science proves it, you will not hear it from the media because they don't want it. So you have some fringe experiments who will say, not out of scientific facts, but just many times financed by interested lobby groups to advance the LGBTQ plus cause. They will show something scientific, and you can be sure the media will pick that up. That's how biased our media are. So it is wrong to impose rules on more than 99%. I said more than 99% of births are clearly male or female. Now, the fact that there are abnormal births, that does not give them the right to impose their position on the much greater 99% of the population. Now, here is what Dr. Deborah So tells us. Scientific studies have confirmed sex differences in the brain that lead to differences in our interests and behavior. These differences are not due to the postnatal, that is after birth environment, or societal messaging. Gender is indeed biological and not due to socialization. So he's saying you are not male or female because of some afterbirth factors. You are made male or female even from the womb. And when you're born, for more than 99%, it is clear what that child is, male or female, and for the abnormal ones, for the most part, you will know by other means. So, as I've said, this is purely driven by scientific study, and that is what her conclusion is. And finally, the argument is freedom to be happy. This is where I'm happy. Ba? Malaya ako, bigyan mo ako ng kalayaan na kung gusto kong kapartner ay my fellow male, or a woman says my happiness is in having a fellow female to be my partner, who are you to impose on what makes me happy? Now, again, I'll concede first, we accept the liberty of choice, including adult relationship. You are free to do that, but a freedom that is accountable. Not accountable to government to be imprisoned, and they did that before, and I do not agree that this is something that should be criminalized. However, we must insist, yes, you are free as an adult to choose your relationship as long as you understand you are accountable to God for that choice. In other words, you can choose sinfully. You can choose a direction, what you think is for happiness. Proverbs 14:12 says, there is a way that seems to be life, but the end of it is the way of death. That's just the fact. So we should treat the non-binary as full humans. Meaning homosexuals, lesbians, or whatever they identify as, we identify them as fellow humans. They're not any less human, nor are they supermen. They're just fellow, equal human beings with rights. We respect them. And I say, as Christians, we should forego contempt. Wag mong hamakin. Wag mong gawing tampulan ng panunukso. And that is unchristian, and we do not want to do that to those who identify in the way that they do. However, this is the fact, my counter to their claim, I only want to be happy. No, that is not true. They demand more than respect for their liberty. That is the fact. Those who do not accept their lifestyle as moral are canceled. And you will find this in suit after suit. Hindi yung sinusuot, yung demanda. You will find it again in America, suit after suit against bakers who will refuse to bake their wedding cakes of a same-sex marriage, florists who refuse to provide flowers to their same-sex marriage, even clergymen, pastors and priests who had been sued because they refused to officiate, to be the officiant of their wedding. And why are they suing? They can make a choice of other florists or bakers who agree with them, and unfortunately, there are clergymen. Even the Pope is agreeing to bless same-sex union. So they can find them, but why are they suing? Precisely because they demand more than just liberty. They want people to accept. And in fact, beyond acceptance, they want others not just to accept, but to celebrate with them. And if you do not celebrate with them, you are a marked person, at least in the West. It's not yet, at least in the Philippines, but it may come, but that is how it is now in the West. So my position and our position, I hope, is that we do not criminalize adult sexual choices. But we also have the liberty, as much as we grant them the liberty to choose an adult relationship that they will give account to God, let them grant us the liberty to proclaim our conviction that it is sinful, and yet we offer grace for their salvation. So let me conclude with what should be the Christian positions on current issues. There are 4 that I want to just successively state. First, we must resist the imposition of non-binary intervention on children and minors. That's why I underscored adult relationship. They are free because they're adults. But don't impose it on children, which is what's happening now in the West. Children are being made to go through medical options without parental consent because they're trying to catch up before puberty sets in. Yun ang gusto nilang gawin. And what they practically do is doing something which is at this point is at best experimental and at worst has been shown in several cases now that people have gone to this transition that is without knowledge of what they were doing. It's a case of having dysphoria in your minor age, and as minor, easily swayed. And then they go through the medical procedure, and then when the mind now becomes more sober, more knowledgeable, they regret. And there are many so-called detransitioners. Detransitioners are those who underwent the medical procedure, and now they regretted what they did, and now they go back to their original sexual identity at birth, but now with a cost. Second is we must uphold the liberty to differ, not to be coerced to serve non-binary interests. So that's our position. You're free for your adult choice of relationship, but make us free as well. Do not ground us or hamstring us or chain us from what we want to do. And yet there are people who will just do that. They want to be free. The idea now is free speech for me, but not for thee. Yung free speech ay kapag nag-speak ka for the LGBTQ+. But if you speak against it, no, you're not free. They suddenly to take it as hate speech, which is a crime. And that's what's happening in the West. Then thirdly, we must expose the looseness of society and homes in sexual moral standards. This is where it begins. When there is looseness in the home. We blame the LGBTQ community for advancing ideas that are wrong, unscientific, and of course to us, unbiblical. But the real culprit, I say in greater number, is looseness in the home. If we have not trained our children to be masculine as boys, to be feminine as girls, then they will be open to influences that will change them and hard to catch up. Finally, we must preach the gospel as extending its offer of grace to non-binary sinners. So we're not dismissing them. We're trying to reach out to them. And there have been, as I've said, cases of people who turned from that non-binary lifestyle, became straightforward, and now are teaching, and in the case of men, preaching what the gospel is in regard to that identity. So I conclude with this verse which Jesus himself said, citing Genesis, "From the beginning of creation, God made them, male and female." So that's Jesus. If you want to go against Jesus, again, it is your choice. I'm a follower of Jesus, and so are many in this gathering, and we subscribe to this principle, male and female only. So believe in the wisdom of God's creation, exhibited in binary genders, only male and female.